In 1996, a journalist on national television presented Madeleine Albright, then the U.S. ambassador to the UN, with a horrific statistic. 500,000 Iraqi children had died as a direct result of American-led sanctions. When asked if that human cost was justified, Albright's response was chillingly direct. "I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it." The actual count of deceased children under the age of 5 reached 567,000. To put that scale of loss into perspective, the United States killed more children with a 13-year economic siege than the total number of people killed by the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The United States and the UN Security Council maintained this financial and economic embargo from August 1990 until May 2003. They kept the borders sealed and supply lines severed long after Iraq had withdrawn from Kuwait, and years after any conceivable military justification had evaporated. The death of 500,000 children was a calculated variable in American policy. It was the expected outcome of a strategy that traded infant heartbeats for geopolitical leverage. The mechanism of this mass casualty event operated in 2 precise steps. Step 1 was kinetic. During the 1991 bombing campaign, U.S. airstrikes systematically destroyed Iraq's critical civilian infrastructure, targeting the water purification plants, sewage treatment facilities, and power stations required to keep a population alive. Step 2 was the blockade. The UN Security Council levied an embargo so total that it blocked the import of the exact materials needed to rebuild that bombed infrastructure. Hospitals went without basic medicine, and water treatment plants were denied the chlorine and replacement pumps needed to function. Data from the ground reflects an immediate catastrophe. By 1995, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization confirmed the mortality rate for children under 5 had spiked by 600%. In Baghdad, a city that previously boasted one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the Middle East, the infant mortality rate doubled. The reality of enforcing this starvation was so repulsive that 2 separate UN humanitarian coordinators, Dennis Halliday and Hans von Sponeck, resigned from their posts in protest. They publicly refused to continue participating in the administration of what they called a genocidal policy. If starving 500,000 infants was the price policymakers were willing to pay, we have to look at exactly what they were buying. They were buying control over some of the largest untapped oil reserves on the planet. While Iraqi citizens were dying of preventable diseases, French and Russian oil giants were already lining up for multi-billion-dollar development contracts, positioning themselves to extract billions the moment the embargo lifted. Washington publicly condemned France and Russia, accusing them of undermining international sanctions for commercial gain. Behind the scenes, American oil companies were executing the exact same maneuver through the back door. The most aggressive participant in this backdoor profiteering was a company called Halliburton, led at the time by a CEO named Dick Cheney. This diagram maps the loophole Halliburton exploited. Through foreign subsidiaries like Dresser Rand, they sold Iraq vital pipeline and water treatment equipment, bypassing U.S. law. Iraq's crude exports surged. Saddam Hussein pumped more oil, and Halliburton profited from the regime these sanctions were designed to cripple. The sanctions functioned as a lethal protection racket. The goal was to keep the Iraqi state weak, isolated, and desperate enough that American energy corporations could eventually dominate its economy. To manage the optics of a starving nation, the UN introduced the Oil for Food program. It was presented as a humanitarian relief effort. In practice, it operated as a massive bureaucratic slush fund. By exploiting this system, Saddam Hussein personally collected more than $20 billion in kickbacks. While his citizens lacked clean drinking water, the dictator skimmed roughly 10% off the top of the aid program to fund palaces and military hardware. The international banking system enabled the theft. The Banque Nationale de Paris, the institution holding the money for the UN program, failed entirely to monitor how the humanitarian revenue was actually being spent. A subsequent official investigation revealed that half of the 4,500 companies participating in the program willingly paid illicit surcharges and bribes directly to the Iraqi government. The entire arrangement was a hypocritical farce. The United States blocked basic medicine while ignoring corporate loopholes. The United Nations administered aid while allowing kickbacks. And massive corporations funded a dictator while claiming to respect international law. When Madeleine Albright looked into a national television camera and admitted that she considered the deaths of 500,000 children an acceptable policy outcome, the American media barely reacted. The quote was practically buried. The same press corps that ignored the confirmed deaths of 500,000 children throughout the 1990s would, a few years later, enthusiastically beat the drums for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, broadcasting shock and awe bombing runs as if they were a sporting event. Working-class Americans funded every step of this slaughter. While their own infrastructure aged, taxpayers spent billions of dollars to maintain a permanent military presence in the Persian Gulf, paying for the fuel and the bombs to enforce a blockade that yielded them absolutely zero benefit. That decade of relentless sanctions, military buildup, and the constant demonization of the Iraqi regime laid the groundwork for the 2003 invasion, a war that would cost 4,500 American lives and drain over $2 trillion from the public treasury. Ordinary taxpayers were robbed blind to finance a war that delivered record profits to defense contractors like Lockheed and Boeing, and gave oil executives unchecked access to Iraqi fields. The estimated 1 million Iraqis who died under sanctions did not perish in the explosive, highly televised violence of a conventional military strike. They succumbed to a quiet, grinding famine of the soul, dying from preventable diseases, malnutrition, and contaminated water. None of the architects behind this slow-motion genocide faced accountability. Madeleine Albright died celebrated as a diplomatic trailblazer. Dick Cheney remains a respected elder statesman. Bill Clinton continues to collect massive speaking fees. Selling economic sanctions as a peaceful alternative to conflict ignores their function as a weapon of total war, a weapon that kills by targeting a nation's weakest citizens over a period of years. The blood of 1 million people remains on the hands of the politicians who designed the policy, the corporations that profited from the loopholes, and the media that refused to report the truth. Madeleine Albright thought the price was worth it. History must record it as a crime against humanity.